All right, everybody, I'm super excited to be back. I know I took some time off of Miracle Theory, but I'm back in my makeshift house studio. As you know, my name is Trinity. I'm the host of Miracle Theory, and we are jumping back into it with a great guest this evening. He's going to tell us about some amazing and very unique experiences that I think you guys will absolutely love and take something great away from. So, without further ado, we're going to talk with Yara this evening. And Yara, I'm just going to have you introduce yourself a little bit more, maybe your name, full name, age, where you're originally from, and then tell me what your biggest fear is as well.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, Yara Phoenix is the name of my YouTube channel. My name is Joey, but people call me Yara Phoenix, or it's kind of like a alter ego. I was born and raised in Hawaii. I have five older kids. They're all pretty much out of the house. My biggest fear actually are frogs.
Really? Why frogs?
Yeah, I don't know. Like I think they're just like a really creepy creature, and I don't like them.
You know what? They are pretty slimy and gross now that you mention it. Um, but okay, so thank you very much for that intro. Next, I usually have my guests think about all of their experiences and sum them up into one like title. Like if you were going to write a book about your entire life, what would you title that book?
Wow, my entire life, what would I call that book? Geez, I don't know. Like if I could put a name of like all of my travels, it would be called something like If My Backpack Could Speak. Because
I found-
everywhere, yeah, every experience that I've ever had, I always had my backpack. It's kind of my uniform when I went out vlogging, when I was traveling and stuff like that. But uh a title for my whole life would be a little bit more complicating. I think I'd have to put more thought into that.
We can do the backpack. Now, was it the same backpack the entire time?
Yeah, it was
Okay.
actually a video about the backpack itself at one point, but I didn't.
That's awesome. No, I get it. I have a backpack I've been using for years too, so that's a good title, actually. I bet that backpack has seen a lot, so that's a good one. Okay, well, again, thank you for that. So this next portion of the show is basically where we're just going to talk. I'm going to ask you questions about your experiences, and we'll just talk about as much as you want. So I want to start off uh, this portion. I know we talked a little bit before this interview recording, and you told me a lot about your outreach work and how you work for a lot of nonprofits. And I want to know when you started that work, maybe how recent was it, and then I want you to tell us what really drew you to that type of work.
I started getting into social services around 2015. Um, Officially, from about maybe 2005 or 2006, like I would take my family around town. Like we would cook up some meals and feed the homeless and kind of do outreach as a family. But I started to get into it as a sponsor and as a social services worker around 2015, 2016.
Okay, so pretty recent, yeah. No, that's cool. Why you just kind of felt within your heart, like you saw people on the street, and you were wanting to do something about it?
Yeah, I used to, like when we were younger, I'm a little bit older. We only had a few channels, and like there was a lot of sorry about that. There's a lot of infomercials, and there was a lot of those feed the children commercials that I always, were stuck watching, and I always, it felt like wow, these kids, or like I was a kid myself, and I would see these commercials like they're out there somewhere in the world, and like they, of course, in the commercial, they show the most graphic, extreme part of the hunger and the poverty, with flies, and they have big heads and swollen bellies, and malnourished, and their ribs showing and thing like that, and it always kind of stuck out. To me, I always had a heart for the homeless and for people in that part of the world. So yeah, like maybe like 5, 6 years ago, I decided just to do it as a career.
Yeah, that's really special. That's really special. I don't feel like a lot of people. kind of look too deeply when they see those types of commercials and things. And I know exactly what you're talking about, like the malnourished, the swollen bellies, all of that, definitely. So I commend you. That's great work. Um, so now thinking back to all of that work, it seems like over the you said maybe the last 5, 6 years, you probably have worked in a variety of places, maybe for a variety of companies or whatever it may have been. I would like you to tell us what your day to day was like. Maybe think back to even one place that had a pretty, heavy responsibility for what you do day to day. What was the hardest thing about working there? And then I'm hoping you can tell us if you felt your life was ever at risk working for any of these companies.
Okay. But when I first started, I was doing outreach in Hawaii, down, the beach areas and the camp areas. Then I worked at a men's shelter, but my most experience came when I was in India. I went in 2018 and 2019, did two internships for a large NGO. The hardest part, I think, was the language barrier. I know the first time that I went there, it was, a translator is not always available all the time. I mean, they have a real shortage of social workers as it is at the NGO, and there's many moving parts. So when I went to, first of all, it took me 9 months to get approved. When I got into social services, it was like, hey, if you really want to climb the ladder, you go to school, you get a master's degree or you get a human services degree. And I was a little older and I didn't want to really go to school. And they were like, hey, if you can do an internship, somewhere, I don't know what your life situation is, but if you're able to do that, that'll bypass the X amount of years of school as far as field experience
Okay.
and relevancy. So I decided to do that. It took me 9 months. A lot of scammers, a lot of people that want to, they make fake websites and want you to pay for these internships and their scams.
Oh,
So this took me a long time to kind of really verify, which ones were legit or not.
hmm
When I decided to do that, when I got there and I spoke with the volunteer coordinator, they were giving each intern an assignment, depending what kind of background you came from, if you were a psychology major or doctor, or like, if you were just like a sociologist or something, or a journalist or whatever. um so like my first time that I went, I was assigned to work at a boys shelter home right near the metro station. It was called Tiz Hazari Metro. It was in New Delhi, and it was a high traffic area, and it was all for boys that were mainly rescued out of child labor camps, sweatshops, so to speak, railways, and human trafficking. So, like, what they wanted me to do, because I wasn't a teacher by trade, I was more of less like and more of like an outreach worker. I
hmm
worked with youth, so they were saying, hey, like, could you try to, teach the boys English? Could you try to do that? I was like, well, so I was like, okay, let me try to see what I can do. So this was like on a Thursday, and I went on the rooftop. A lot of things like in the Middle East or in India, or like you go on the rooftop to do whatever, you eat on the rooftop, you do whatever. So I went up there and I went on YouTube and I did a lot of research, as an English second language, to try to find some modules or some things that I can teach, because a
hmm
lot of majority of the kids there are way below proficiency level. Like they're way below, like it's kind of vice versa, because you get a 14-year-old kid that can't speak English very well, but you get a 5 or 6-year-old kid that could. So it's just like
Very.
it's yeah. So they were like, hey, just by the English that you can speak now, that's good enough to teach some of the boys. We just want them to learn basic greetings and things like that. So I looked up a couple of lessons, and I tried, and I did it. I did 4 or 5 hours a day, maybe three classes, 45 minutes each, breaks in between. It was really challenging because not everywhere you go, like you're welcome with open arms. Like a lot of people view like Americans, like there's like, you know like, oh, you automatically have so much money that you can come here, and like I showed one of them a picture of my house, and I was living in a house in uh in Hawaii, and it was just a regular house, and it's like they're looking at this house, it's like, wow, you must make so much money,
Sure.
you know
Yeah.
you're living in America. One of the biggest challenges was not having a translator and not being accepted all the time.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can imagine. So you started this outreach work kind of locally where you lived, and then you wanted to take it a step further. So you went to get an internship through this other company who sent you to India, and without any actual like teaching certification, you were kind of told to just teach these super, vulnerable children a whole new language. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it so dramatically because like the next week they was like, hey, do you know anything on substance abuse? I'm like, well, in America it's like methamphetamine, it's heroin, it's
Mm.
pills. Like in India, it's tobacco and it's inhalants.
Oh,
For
okay.
children, it's inhalants because they use it to kill a lot of the hunger. When they're begging because they
Oh,
go to 2 3 days without eating a lot of the times, and we would run into a lot of them doing work in the slums or even in the shelter homes as it is, like on inhalants. So I was like, well, of course, with the almighty internet, well, let me see, what I can do or whatever.
mhm.
So whatever change, or you'd go into social skills or like teaching boys hygiene, teaching them like etiquette when they're eating. It's just a lot of different things.
Wow, yeah, that must have been very difficult. Plus, these kids don't know you. You're like a foreign stranger to them, right? So they have to probably wrap their minds around that too. Now, when you were out doing all of this field work and teaching all of these things, you said, part of the challenge is not feeling accepted. Did any part of you feel like you were in imminent danger? Like, oh, like, wow, this is a very unsafe place for me to be. Did you ever feel that way?
When I was in the shelter homes, not at all. Both of the years, the next year I worked at a one for little kids, a drop-in center. But when I did outreach work because I had a friend that I sought out, and he did tours, and I befriended him, and he took me privately, and I paid him. He would be a translator slash
Oh,
tour
wow.
guide. Had a good rapport with a lot of the people in the slums because he's been there for years. So I paid him, and he'd take me in the slums, and like he'd have a little conversation with me, like, hey, if I tell you just not to film, do you have any problem not filming? I'm like, no, I don't have a problem not filming. Like, I'll just turn the camera off. So like there was a few times where like we thought it was okay to film, and people were like, hey, they feel like I'm exploiting them because they don't know if I'm like a YouTube person or a journalist making $100,000 a year or
Right,
getting videos in the slums, like which I wasn't, like I was just a worker. So
right.
I did a lot of the times I were threatened, like not with any weapons or with violence, but I was told pretty aggressively to leave a few times. So that was kind of like the extent of that.
Okay, so like still pretty unnerving considering this is not any place you're familiar with either. So I'd imagine in general is you're probably pretty wary. Now seems like you have a million and one stories. You seem to have seen a lot of things, heard a lot of things. Um, is there any or a few experiences that you can think back, positive or negative, that like really stand out to you, whether they were like really scary or really great? And does that experience kind of change your perspective on life a little bit? Maybe change your perspective of yourself or the world? I mean, you've been to a place probably a lot of people have not.
I mean, yeah, there's a few. One of them was like, I remember like going to an ATM, and it's like when you go to an ATM in a lot of places, like a phone booth. There's like a little door, and you shut it, and you go in the ATM, and there's always like a security guard sitting there with a shotgun, and half of the time he's sleeping. Like it's no joke, like he's literally sleeping. So like I would go to this ATM every day to like every other day or whatever to withdraw some money, and like I noticed it was this guy just always kind of lurking in the background in the shadows. So one day, he comes and he approaches me and he's like, hey, I see you. You're always walking up and down this road. I see you with the children. Because sometimes after I would work, like some of the children would be collecting bottles or begging. They would recognize me and stuff like that. So I'm like, yeah, hey, like I'm from America. Blah blah blah. I work with the children. I'm doing this at this NGO. So he's like, hey, like, what do you do after work? And I'm like, no, I just go out and eat, or I go shopping, or I go back to my room or whatever. So he's like, are you looking for something to smoke? Are you looking for any kind of drugs? I'm like, no, I'm good. Like, I don't do any of that kind of stuff. He's like, are you looking for any women? I'm like, no, I'm certainly not looking for any women. So he steps in front of me to stop me when I'm walking, and he looks at me and he stops me. He puts one hand on each of my shoulders and he looks me in the eye. He goes, are you interested in any children, basically, like quote
Wow.
unquote, wanna, and he puts his hand on as a gesture as like how tall they are. He's like, are you interested? And I kind of knew that as kind of like a lingo of like, okay, like I said, no, like no,
Yeah.
no, like, well, like, you let me know, basically, like, and I shared it with my friend that I was mentioning earlier, that took me on these tours, and he's like, yeah, he said, oh, where were you? And I'm like, oh, I was on this street. And he's like, yeah, that's a high area, for that. Um, and that was one incident. There's probably like maybe five or six, and what changed my perspective is just like it happens like everywhere, like here in the Pacific Northwest, in America, in Asia, in every country, and it really turned the light bulb on to be like to actually be confronted and to have someone look you in the eye as another human being, physically touching you and make you a proposition or an offer or a suggestion like that is just like and I'm part of the solution, so to speak. Like, I'm part of the greater good there, trying to combat that. And it's like I have somebody who's like, you know what I mean? It's just like, okay. um
It's almost
but
like exactly what you were there to fight was right up in your face, almost like challenging you. Did any part of you want to like fight or yell or be like, no, that's disgusting? Like, what?
yeah, that was actually like the third time. The first time it happened, it was in Calcutta, and it was different because I didn't find out exactly what was going on till later, like when we
Okay.
got them. But they were arguing, and I was having a conversation with my friend, and he was like, hey, basically, this lady was asking if, because she recognized you as a foreigner, if you were interested in one of her children, because a lot of times foreigners will bring people like Indians in there to translate, to find them a deal or whatever. So
Yeah.
that's what they assumed that I was doing, and I was like, oh, no, no, like, like, and yeah, like I remember this feeling like after I left to my room, like I went out to get something to eat, and I was watching cricket on like this big screen in this restaurant, and I was like having a beer, I think, with my meal, and I was kind of like sinking in, thinking like, man, like of all the videos I've ever watched and all the workshops and seminars that I've ever been to and all the training that I've ever been on the computer, it's a much different feeling to have it happen in front of you, like in real life.
Yeah. Oh my God, I cannot even imagine. Plus, thinking about how that really does happen everywhere, like everywhere, no matter how, you know, no matter what country or third world or not or wherever, I've heard things about Portland. It's just very unnerving. And to talk to someone who's actually seen that firsthand, I really wanted people to hear this as well because I think it's something that we really don't like. It's never talked about in the media. Never. I rarely hear it. Maybe a story on the news, like on Yahoo or whatever, but it's never on TV or easily read about.
Yeah.
So sad. Um, so considering, this must have been like you probably carry those thoughts and feelings with you about how terrible that was. And being in and out of the slums and like seeing all these wild, unimaginable things in like dark places. Can you think back about maybe a miraculous moment? I have it typed up in my question here as if there is a point in your journey where you feel like you personally have experienced what you might consider a miracle, whether that be, helping a child or escaping from somewhere. Can you think back on what that might be?
Well, something that really stood out to me was like the second time that I came back. The first time that I went, I worked at the boys' shelter homes. The second time that I went back, I worked at the drop-in center where the main office was. And there was a kid that I didn't even recognize I think there was like 55 kids in the shelter home in the first time that I went, and he recognized me, and I was like, they have interns year round, and it's like, and there's a lot of them, quite a few of them, and
Okay.
they go through them. So like when he remembered me, he was telling the other social worker, and I was like, wow, for him to remember me, and we spoke, and it's like he remembered some of the stuff that we were going over. It kind of like, wow, like I'm just like a drop in the bucket, so to speak, for an intern that came from an island, in the middle of the ocean to 8,000 something miles away to a town in India to work at a shelter home for
Mhm.
just a short amount of time, and for to come back a year later, like 13 months later, for a 12-year-old kid to remember, something, was like, wow, like like a miracle. No, I mean, I've seen other things like in slums where like I've seen, I've heard stories, and I've seen like from one year to the next year of people that were literally looking like they were gonna die, like malnourished wise, that were rescued by sponsorship agencies or NGOs that are now like going to school, or are now getting vocational training, or
Yeah.
like learn how to sew and things like that, like the girls, like from coming off of begging or being rescued from a brothel or something like that. So like I've heard a lot of those stories.
Okay, so maybe not so much yourself experience something of a miracle, but in a way, pretty miraculous that the tiniest thing that you might do that seems small to you is huge for someone who's maybe vulnerable or underprivileged, which is, I mean, you're right. A small child, 12 years old, to remember you a year later from way back when is, you know, honestly, yeah, very miraculous in itself. Because for all you know, you could have saved his life or made him think differently or whatever it might have been is amazing, you know, which is probably a great testament to all the work you've done. I'm sure there's been so many moments, rewarding moments throughout this journey, which is great. Yeah.
There's a lot.
Yeah. Oh God, I'm sure. Um, so now this is I love this question because it's interesting to see what people say. If you could go back in time, and the story does not change, you can't change anything, but if you could give advice to your younger self, what would you tell yourself?
I could give advice to my younger self. It's really like, you don't know the pain that people are carrying. Like you don't know what people are going through when you see them. Wherever it may be, if it's at a grocery store, or if it's at like your job, or just passing by, like you never know what people are going through, and you need to be equally compassionate and empathetic towards everyone, and not be just biased of whatever reason or whatever you're biased about. Like you really have to, because you don't know. Like even if the person drives a nice car or has nice clothes, like he could be going through some kind of pain that's unimaginable, and he or she, we never know.
You just never know. So you would remind yourself of this, like you would go back and remind yourself of this. I
Yeah.
see.
Um, yeah, of course, because when I was younger, and a lot of us when we're younger, we kind of have this me thing. It's just about me, and we don't look at the big picture. Or it's just me and my family, or me and my spouse, or me and my siblings. Nobody's gonna think about these people across the world that are surviving on 50 cents or $1 a day.
Right. Yeah, that in this kind of as unsheltered as it seems sometimes, we're still very sheltered in terms of what we really don't know. Like pretty much most of what you told me today, I did not know about. Even about knowing how to be an intern and going to the organization. Like it's a whole process that you taught yourself, which I'm sure took patience and courage and all of these things. So I think that's great advice. I think, remembering we're all human and to be compassionate. And I really liked what you said about, you don't know what everyone is carrying, what kind of pain they're carrying. I think that's a great way to put it. Because what might not really seem like a big deal on the outside could be huge for this person. So that's great. Thank you for that piece of advice. I think people are going to have a good reminder. through this episode. So, my last question to kind of wrap up, thinking about there are people watching this, there's people who are going to listen and take away something. And I was hoping you could think about the audience, and what is something you might suggest to the audience, recommend to them, or even wish that they knew about, whether it be a program or another piece of advice or something that you could, like, if you could get your message out, what would it be?
Well, child sponsorship really helps, and it's really, it really works. And it might not be for everyone, but in comparison, if you're paying $35 a month for one child, like if you go out to lunch with a friend, it's about $35 for two people.
Yeah,
And you can really provide you know necessities and vital things that kids and families need, just for that amount for a whole month. Like, and I feel that a lot of us, even though like we're struggling, we can put that aside. Like a lot of us spend more than that on coffee in a couple of days or a week,
right.
and to just research, even on human trafficking, like take a little bit of time to research, to just educate yourself, because it's a lot more widespread than people think.
Mhm.
And it's definitely probably happening in your town or wherever you are. I almost guarantee there's some kind of case or some kind of something going on wherever you live. That's how widespread it is. But just educate yourself, kind of, like it's always, it's getting better, but it's getting worse. There's a lot more people that are getting educated on it, but it's getting worse, so to speak, globally. So look into child sponsorship, in any country with any organization. Like use your Google bar on your phone to do that instead of looking up other things. At least kind of like enter that into your mind to see where it takes you.
Okay, that's great. Yourself. That's a perfect piece of advice, especially considering everything you just told us. I would love to get some resources from you, and I'll put them with the video. Um, and yeah, thank you very much for your words of wisdom and everything you've told us so far. Are you doing any sort of work like this today or at this time, or you kind of moved on?
No, like I haven't been doing it, in the last couple of months, with COVID and stuff. Like it's kind of weird, with the interaction.
Mhm.
I have been doing outreach in Vancouver, and I was working residentially in Portland. But
Oh,
as of right, kind of like looking into doing different things outreach wise.
great. Keep going.
Yeah.
Oh
And of
man.
course, when travel opens up, later on, with then that's going to be, something of its own.
Yeah, oh, for sure. We'll definitely need probably as many people as we can to just be out and helping people. So, well, with that being said, do you have anything else you want to add or include? Any last minute words?
No, I thank you for having me. Just to speak, and kind of people listening, to kind of maybe you never know, because somebody could be listening, and it might start them on a journey. It might light
Oh,
a fire, in them. So I really appreciate it, because any kind of uh any kind of exposure is good. I really appreciate it.
of course. That's what I'm here for. This is the whole goal with this show is to just spread the word on how to be better, how to do better, and how to be compassionate and empathetic. So, yeah, thank you for your time. And that was amazing.